It began with accusations. They didn't arrive in bursts of anger, but in whispers designed to corrode. A question asked too sharply, a glance sharpened into suspicion, a silence meant to punish. At first, I brushed it aside, telling myself jealousy was proof of care, that doubt was only the shadow of love. But shadows lengthen, and soon they consumed everything. She told me she had proof I was unfaithful, that my absences, my late nights, my distracted silences were evidence of betrayal. I searched myself for guilt, but found only exhaustion, the kind that comes from trying to reassure someone who refuses to be reassured. Still, I carried the burden of her certainty, because when someone repeats a lie long enough, even the accused begins to wonder if it might be true. Then came the announcement that broke whatever thread was left between us. She told me she was pregnant. The word hung heavy, reshaping the air around us. A child. Our child, she insisted. Proof that despite her jealousy, we were bound together in the most permanent way. I wanted to believe it. I wanted the promise of renewal, a chance to turn suspicion into stability. But something in her eyes betrayed the words. The joy felt rehearsed, her smile too sharp at the edges. She wielded the pregnancy like a weapon, a shield against my doubts, a chain to anchor me where she wanted me kept. For weeks I lived in dissonance. Part of me prepared for fatherhood, clinging to the possibility of purpose. Another part recoiled from the unease that grew heavier each time I touched her hand and felt nothing in return. Our connection had become performance, measured touches, forced conversations, silences thick with secrets. The cracks widened when small truths began to surface. She grew careless in her stories, timelines collapsing under scrutiny. Friends slipped details she hadn't intended to share. The more I pieced together, the more the shape of her deception revealed itself. And then the truth came, cold and absolute. The child she carried was not mine. She had been unfaithful, all while accusing me of sins I had never committed. I should have felt vindicated, but vindication never came. Only grief. Grief not only for the betrayal, but for the way she had used creation itself as a weapon. Grief for the trust I had once given freely, now poisoned beyond repair. Leaving her should have been liberation, yet it felt like haunting. The accusations echoed long after she was gone, lodged in my chest like splinters. I replayed every moment of doubt, every defensive explanation I had offered, every tear shed in frustration. It was as though she had planted something inside me. Not a child, but a seed of suspicion that now grew without her presence. Strange things began happening in the weeks that followed. I would wake in the night to the sound of crying, faint but insistent, though the apartment was empty. Shadows shifted across the walls, taking shapes I couldn't name. Sometimes I swore I heard her voice in the hallway, whispering my name, sharp with accusation. The worst were the mirrors. At first it was subtle. My reflection seemed delayed, my eyes lingering a moment longer than they should. Then one night, I leaned closer and saw not myself, but her. Her face flickered where mine should be, mouth curved in that too sharp smile, belly swollen, though she was no longer here. I stumbled back, heart thrashing, but when I looked again, only my pale reflection stared back. Friends told me I was imagining things, that trauma leaves echoes, that grief manifests in strange ways. But I knew the truth. She hadn't left. Not completely. Betrayal is its own kind of haunting, and I carried her with me whether I wanted to or not. I began avoiding sleep, terrified of the dreams that came when I closed my eyes. Dreams where I held a child with no face, its cries echoing through endless corridors. Dreams where she stood at the foot of my bed, eyes black, belly splitting open to reveal not life but rot. Each morning I woke weaker, as though the dreams drained me of more than rest.
The world outside dimmed. Work blurred. Conversations fell hollow. Days slipped past without meaning. I walked through life with her shadow beside me, an absence heavier than presence. And always, beneath it all, the echo of her accusations. You're the one who betrayed me. You're the one who ruined everything. One night, I found myself standing in front of her old apartment without remembering how I'd gotten there. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, but I felt her eyes watching from inside. My chest tightened with the weight of something unseen, and I turned to leave only to hear it. the faint cry of a child, thin and piercing, drifting through the night air. I froze. My body screamed to run, but my feet carried me closer. I pressed my ear against the door, heart pounding, and heard it again, the wail of an infant, broken by whispers too faint to catch. My hand reached for the handle, trembling. But when I turned it, the door swung open onto darkness. The cries stopped. Silence pressed close, thick and suffocating. And in the silence I heard her voice, low and steady, whispering from the dark. It was always yours. I stumbled back into the night, running until my lungs burned. But the words followed, etched into my mind, louder with each passing day. And so I realized the truth. Betrayal doesn't end when the liar is gone. It lingers, festers, becomes something more, something alive. And whatever she had planted in me was only beginning to grow. The days after that night blurred into a haze. I carried her voice with me like a weight strapped to my ribs. It was always yours. The words echoed in quiet spaces, between conversations, in the hum of electronics when the apartment fell still. They weren't just memory. They felt alive, as though whispered into my ear anew each time. Sleep became my enemy. Whenever I surrendered to it, I dreamed of the child, sometimes swaddled, sometimes crawling, sometimes standing too tall for its age, face obscured by shadow. The cries would begin soft, then swell until they rattled my bones. And in every dream, she was there, hovering just behind the child, eyes sharp with accusation, her belly still swollen, as though the lie never unraveled. I began avoiding mirrors. What once had been subtle distortion grew bolder. My reflection watched me with an expression I didn't wear, lips curled into a smirk that wasn't mine. Once I caught sight of her beside me in the reflection, though the room around me was empty. Her hand rested on her stomach, the swell unnatural, her fingers curling possessively. I smashed the mirror that night, but shards scattered across the floor still showed her face when I stepped around them.
The apartment itself changed. The walls carried a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging slowly through plaster. Lights flickered without cause. The smell of earth and iron lingered no matter how often I cleaned. At night, I swore I heard footsteps pacing in the hallway outside my bedroom, pausing at the door, waiting. I told myself it was stress, trauma fermenting into madness, but the more I denied it, the stronger it grew. The lie she had lived became a presence I couldn't evict. It had rooted itself not only in memory, but in the fabric of my reality. Work slipped from my grasp. Colleagues asked if I was all right, their voices carrying pity I couldn't bear. I stopped answering messages, stopped meeting friends, retreating further into the cocoon of my haunted apartment. Isolation fed the presence, but I couldn't force myself to leave. It was as if the walls had grown teeth, locking me inside with her ghost. One night, the crying returned, not in dreams, but in waking life. Thin and sharp, drifting through the air vents. I pressed my ear to the metal grate and felt cold air rush across my face. The cry echoed through the ducts, bouncing from room to room. I followed it, stumbling barefoot across the apartment until it led me to the closet. The door rattled softly, as if something inside pressed against it. My hand trembled on the knob. When I pulled it open, the crying stopped. Only silence and the faint scent of damp soil remained. But on the floor, etched into the wood, was a symbol. A crude circle intersected by jagged lines, the grooves fresh as if carved by unseen hands. I traced it with my finger, heart thudding, and felt warmth pulsing from it like a heartbeat. That was when I realized she wasn't haunting me to punish. She was trying to create. The thought poisoned my nights. If she had lied in life, if the child was never mine, then what grew here now was her attempt to rewrite that truth, to force me into fatherhood whether I wanted it or not. Each whisper, each distortion, each cry was construction, brick by brick of a reality where her story became final. I tried to fight it. I tore up the floorboards where the symbol had been carved, threw them into the dumpster outside. But the next morning, new lines appeared on the walls, faint at first, then bolder, circles intersecting, lines repeating, as if the apartment itself was rewriting its bones. Exhaustion hollowed me. I barely ate, barely slept, moving through days with the dull rhythm of survival. Yet the presence thrived, growing stronger the weaker I became. Once, while washing my hands, I looked down and saw dirt swirling in the water, clinging to my skin. My reflection in the sink showed her behind me, belly round, eyes gleaming with triumph.
The turning point came when the cries grew louder than my thoughts. I woke one night to the sound filling the entire apartment, vibrating through the walls. The air pressed heavy on my chest, suffocating. I stumbled into the living room and froze. There, in the center of the floor, lay a crib. Wooden, old, its paint peeling. It hadn't been there before. Inside, a shape writhed beneath a blanket, small limbs twitching, the cries piercing. My breath caught as I stepped closer, dread coiling in my stomach. I pulled the blanket back. The crib was empty. But the crying continued, louder now, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. And as I turned, I saw her standing in the corner, half hidden in shadow. Her belly stretched grotesquely, skin taut, veins dark beneath the surface. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, the cries poured from her throat, the sound of an infant spilling from a woman long gone. I ran, slamming the bedroom door, collapsing against it. My chest heaved, tears burning my eyes. The cries dulled, but never stopped, leaking through the walls like water through cracks. I curled into myself on the floor, whispering that none of this was real, that she was gone, that the child was not mine. But deep inside, I felt the truth. Denial no longer mattered. She had rewritten the story, and I was trapped inside it. The days that followed blurred into ritual. I woke to the cries, lived with them humming in my skull, slept only when exhaustion crushed me. The crib remained in the living room, sometimes empty, sometimes filled with shadows that shifted like restless limbs. And always, she lingered near, reflected in glass, standing in doorways, belly swollen, smile sharp. I stopped resisting. Resistance only fed her. Instead, I began to mark the walls with my own symbols, desperate scratches meant to counter hers. Circles broken, lines fractured. My fingers bled, nails cracked, but still I carved. Each mark was a declaration. This is not mine. This is not real. This is not me. But the walls healed overnight. My symbols vanished. Hers remained. And with each day, the presence grew stronger. I knew what was coming. I felt it in the hum of the floorboards, in the weight of the air. She hadn't carried my child in life, but in death, or whatever state this was, she would make me father something that would bind me to her forever. And as much as I told myself I would resist, part of me wondered if it was already too late. Because sometimes when the cries softened into coos, I felt something stir inside me, a flicker of recognition, a pulse of unwanted tenderness. And I realized with horror that the haunting wasn't just external. She was building it inside me. By the final month, the apartment no longer belonged to me. The walls pulsed faintly at night, breathing in rhythm with the cries that never ceased. The crib remained in the living room, waiting like a shrine, its peeling wood growing darker each day, as though it absorbed the air itself. I had stopped inviting light into the rooms. Curtains stayed closed, lamps dim. Darkness made her presence easier to expect, if not easier to bear. I tried once more to escape, packed a bag, shoved keys into my pocket, and opened the front door. The hallway stretched too long, farther than it should have, lined with shadows that bent toward me. I walked, heart hammering, but no matter how many steps I took, my door remained behind me, waiting. The world had shrunk to these walls. I couldn't leave.
So I surrendered to observation. If I could not flee, I would at least watch. The patterns grew clearer. The cries peaked at midnight, faded by dawn. The symbols etched themselves into corners, pulsing faintly, then vanishing by morning. The crib sometimes rocked on its own, though the air remained still. And she, my ex, appeared more often, her shape solidifying with each passing day. She never spoke again after that first night. Her mouth opened, but only the cries spilled out, endless and layered. Yet her eyes told me everything. Accusation, triumph, inevitability. She had twisted betrayal into creation, forcing me into a role I had never chosen. One evening, exhaustion broke me. I sat in the living room, staring at the crib, the cries soft like lullabies. Against my will, I rose and leaned over the edge. Shadows curled inside, writhing softly like smoke with weight. For the first time, I reached out. My fingers brushed the darkness, and warmth pulsed against my skin. It was then I felt it. Recognition. Not love, but something close. A thread binding me to the thing in the crib. My breath hitched, horror flooding me. She had done it. She had planted the seeds so deeply that even I began to believe.
The presence grew stronger after that night. The crib no longer stood empty. Shapes inside shifted with weight, small fists pressing against the blanket, cries shifting to coos, then to laughter. Not the laughter of a child, but hers, echoing sharp, triumphant, spilling from a throat that wasn't there. I stopped fighting sleep. The dreams had become rehearsals for waking life anyway. In them, I held the child, though its face blurred and shifted. Sometimes it carried her features, sometimes mine, sometimes none at all. And always, she stood behind us, her swollen belly gone, her hands empty, watching me cradle what she had created. One night, I woke to find myself standing in the living room, the crib pressed against my chest. My arms cradled nothing, yet they swayed gently, as though rocking. The cries filled my ears, vibrating through my bones. My reflection in the dark window showed me holding a child, its face black with shadow, its eyes two pits of hunger. From that moment, the boundary collapsed. I no longer knew where waking ended and dreams began. I would find myself carving symbols into the walls without memory of doing so, or speaking words in a language I didn't understand. My body no longer belonged fully to me. I was host, conduit, vessel. The final night came without warning. The air grew unbearably heavy, pressing against my chest. The walls trembled, symbols flaring bright. The cries swelled to deafening roars, shaking the glass in their frames. The crib rocked violently, wood groaning, and then split down the middle. From within, it emerged. Not a child, not human. A shape stitched from shadow and flesh, small but wrong. Its limbs too thin, its mouth too wide. It crawled onto the floor, laughter spilling from its throat in her voice. I stumbled back, heart hammering, but my feet refused to move. The thing rose slowly, swaying on unsteady legs, and lifted its face toward me. For the first time, I saw its eyes. They were mine. A scream tore from my chest, but the sound was swallowed by the roars around me. She appeared then, behind the creature, her form sharper than ever, no longer ghost, but solid. Her belly was flat, her face serene. She placed her hands on the creature's shoulders, guiding it forward, pride gleaming in her gaze. I tried to deny it, to tell myself this wasn't real, but the thread between us pulsed stronger than denial. Blood or not, betrayal or not, it was bound to me. It carried my reflection, my shadow, my voice already echoing faintly from its mouth.
She had remade the story. She had won. The thing stepped closer, its mouth curling into a smile too wide for its face. Its hand reached for mine, small but burning with warmth. Against every scream in my body, I felt my fingers curl around it. The hum stopped. Silence fell heavy, absolute. And in that silence, I understood. I hadn't escaped betrayal. I had become it. Now, days or weeks later, I can't tell which, I sit in the same apartment, curtains drawn, lights dim. The crib is gone, but the thing remains, moving in shadows, whispering in my own voice. Sometimes I catch it in the corner of my eye, small hands tracing new symbols into the walls. Sometimes I wake to find it sleeping beside me, its breath steady, its eyes open. I no longer dream of her. I no longer need to. She left her legacy here alive and insistent, and whether I want it or not, I am father now. Not to a child, not to innocence, but to betrayal given form.